Hello and welcome to this week's episode where I'm rejoined by Shafik Meghji, an award-winning journalist, travel writer, author, editor and broadcaster. Shafik is back on for the hat-trick episode, which is the first for the podcast. And today we're talking about Tren del Mundo, the world's southernmost railway, and other train routes, Shafik's upcoming book, Small Earthquakes, and some of Shafik's recent travels. Welcome back. How you doing, dude?
Thank you very much for having me back. I feel honoured to be making the hat-trick appearance. Looking forward to diving into lots of diverse topics as we always do when we have a chat.
Yeah, always great to have you back. Where have you been? Let's rephrase that. How's 2025 gone so far, you say?
I'm going to separate that. Professionally, it's been good because I've finished the latest draft in my new book, which I know we'll talk about a bit later, and
Yep.
I've been planning some travels. Obviously, in a non-work sense, everyone else knows what's going on in 2025, so let's say it's been a bit more interesting and unpredictable than one would have hoped for. So let's say a mixed bag.
Okay, I think I agree with that, definitely from this end. I'm going to flip this question, actually. I'm going to start with this, actually. Where are you planning to go this year? I mean, let's go, maybe personal and work, if you can say anything about work, but personally, anything on the horizon that's booked in? Anything exciting or new?
Yeah, absolutely. It was quite unusual for me the start of this year because I've been so ensconced in book writing that I've been at my desk. So with that virtually out of the way now, it's been really exciting to kind of start planning new trips and to start working on new ideas for books and for articles and so on. So initially I'm going to do one of the rarest things for a travel writer to do, which is take a holiday. So I'm going to go over the next couple of months. I'm going to do some train travel through Europe. Originally planning to go to Bilbao and San Sebastian in the Basque Country in Spain, which I haven't visited before. So I'm looking forward to that, both from a break point of view and from going to a new part of the world. A bit later in the year, I'm hoping to get to Canada again.
Oh, you coming here?
Yeah, hopefully so.
Okay.
It's a country I have a lot of affection for. Got lots of relatives over in various parts, but I think it's ripe with interesting stories. So I'm hoping to do that later in the year, and then a bit after that, Latin America always draws me back. So a bit further, I've been focusing on the southern part of the region, and now looking to head a bit further north. So I'm hoping to get back to Central America, a place I love. I think a place that's underwritten about, place that's timely and in the news for lots of reasons. So I'm looking forward to getting back out there and on the road again.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, Central America, since we last spoke, is a place I've been to. I went to El Salvador and I did interview some people locally, and I actually had an amazing time. Like, El Salvador was a bit of a, not say a risk, but more of a unknown, because we all know the history, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going there solo. I'm not doing a tour. I'm there for 2 weeks, so I've no idea where I'm going or what I'm seeing. So I booked in San Salvador, right, for a couple of days and spoke to a few locals, done some free walking tours, interviewed a few people, and got some great ideas. So that's a highly recommended place to go to if you want a out there destination, which is now on the cards, right? Because previously it's off the cards. And also the content, like you say, is not really been written about that much. So my YouTube and podcast has gone really well in terms of that, because it's now probably starting to come into people's minds, especially this year. They're going to double their tourist numbers. Obviously next year it might be more. So it's quite interesting to see how that country is now going to draw some tourists in.
Absolutely. Well, I will have to pick your brain. I mean, I think in Central America, with some obvious exceptions, Costa Rica being the classic example, kind of often slips under the radar from a travel point of view.
Yeah.
And it's obviously a very interesting, varied, and in many cases undervisited part of the world. So look forward to checking out some of your content as well.
And interestingly, if you do go, I think I might be going back to El Salvador this time next year potentially. So it's on my list to go back and see more of the country, because even though it's quite small, there's lots to see and do, and 2 weeks was not enough. So if we're in the same area at the same time, that'd be pretty cool to meet up for a coffee and pupusas. That's what they eat in El Salvador. So yeah,
I'm always up for a coffee and a pupusa. So count me in, James.
It's funny because on one of my YouTube episodes, the first scene is the pupusas have got the hostel, and I had loads of Salvadorians comment on my YouTube, like saying, "Oh, thanks for visiting the country. Please share it. Like, we want people to come and visit." But a few people said, "Oh yeah, those pupusas that the hostel gave you, I need to apologise. They weren't the best." I was like, "Well, luckily for you, that's the first time I ever had them, so I didn't have anything to compare them to." But it's quite funny that people are saying sorry, but they didn't look great. was like, oh, they taste all right.
Yeah, I mean, food is an emotive subject
Yeah.
all around the world. And interestingly enough, I've been trying to do a bit more travelling vicariously through the various restaurants in my hometown of London, and very excited to check out, hopefully soon, a Salvadoran restaurant nearby me in southeast London, which I've heard on good authority it serves up very good pupusas and stuff.
There's one here, I think I've researched, or no, weirdly, this is so strange. In Suchitoto, small town in El Salvador, just north of San Salvador. It's a Civil War town because it's quite big in the Civil War. You can do tours there. Got a great recommendation for a tour. You go and meet a local who fought in the war, Civil War this is. And anyway, I was on this tour, but normally they have to run big tours for this because they need to guarantee numbers because the locals are very busy and they want to pay the veterans some money, which is absolutely fair enough. So I joined this tour as a solo guy, but onto G Adventures tour. So it's like 25 of us, right? All youngsters, probably not really interested in the Civil War part, but I was like, got like 100 questions I want to ask him. Anyway, one of the guides on there used to live in Vancouver. He's Guatemalan. And he said, oh yeah, there's one Salvadoran restaurant in Vancouver, which is on Main Street. So I need to go and check that out to get some kind of reminisce about the pupusas that I had. But also, weirdly, he was in Antigua at the same time as me, and we bumped into each other in the square. It wasn't planned, just in Antigua in the middle of the central square. Just like shouted across each other to the square, had a nice hug and catch up. Just these really weird random things that happen when you travel where you think that kind of thing happens in the past because you now have social media and had his WhatsApp. But I didn't know where he was at a certain time, and we just bumped into each other and had a good old catch-up about that Civil War tour. So these kind of cool things do happen.
Chance encounters when travelling and bumping up to the same person several times as you travel around a region or a country or a continent. Yeah, one of the great pleasures of it, the kind of the serendipity of it, and it's kind of it persists even in the in the interconnected, globalized social media age that we live in.
Yeah.
Today you can still have those connections, and it's a great pleasure of being on the road.
Did that happen a lot to you? I know you travelled to South America for 20 years, like as a region. In the early days, let's go before social media. Did that happen quite a lot when you're like backpacking around and going from country to country?
Yeah. I mean, very much so. I mean, when I first went, back 20, social media. I'm showing my age a bit here, but social media was, in its early stages, and guidebooks were the king at that point. And you'd very much find, this was my first visit to the continent. You'd very much find that you would see the same people at various same hostels, the same sites, the same travel agencies, the same restaurants and bars and that kind of stuff, because they had the Rough Guide to South America, they had the Lonely Planet. They were following the same, quote unquote gringo trail around South America. So you'd see them on the Inca Trail, and these are really intense, meetings. Particularly when you're young, particularly when this is one of my first backpacking trips. And then, you don't see them for maybe a month or so, and you're in Buenos Aires, and you're walking down the streets of Palermo, and you're wondering where to get a steak and where to get some ice cream and stuff. And then you bump into them there, and then scroll forward, and you're in Chilean Patagonia a few months later again, and you see them again. And it's one of the great pleasures. And sometimes, particularly if you're traveling on your own, meeting up with other solo travelers, deciding to do a trip together, do some tours together, just have a dinner together or a meal or whatever. Again, that's really what it's about. Being forging these kind of human connections. And that happened to me when I first started backpacking, and it still happens now as well. And particularly with southern South America, I'm lucky to have visited repeatedly and go very, very regularly. And it's always a pleasure looking up old contacts, looking up friends that I've made along the way, sharing stories and kind of clicking back in. So yeah, and it's kind of it's the great thing to the phones, the laptops, all of that kind of stuff is really, really useful, right? But kind of there's nothing like actually just going out there, talking to people, fellow travelers, locals, of course, and kind of forging those kind of connections. Yeah,
because I met a lot of people doing like the north to south route in Central America, so they probably started in Canada, maybe. Some couples on motorbikes started in Alaska, so they're coming all the way down, right? Going all the way down to the south. But yeah, they all go along the same route. So I got the impression, I sort of first start to meet these people in Santa Ana in El Salvador. They're passing through, and they're like, we we bump into the same people, we do the same roads, like the Pan American Highway. Like you could stop off on the side of the road just for like a coffee, and you might bump into a few bikers there. It sounds quite a cool sort of like community going down, really, because you would have the same experiences, you probably do the same activities, meet the same people, but it's always great to go 3 weeks down the line and reconnect and talk about their stories, right? It's quite I won't say addictive is a bit of a strong word, but it's a very strong feeling to get that back, isn't it? Because you want to go and experience the same stuff as other people that maybe in your home life people don't experience that you're doing there, right? So I think I talked to my sister about this yesterday, like those strong small periods of time, those feelings and those shared experiences are quite strong, aren't they? And then you sort of dissipate into real life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're vivid, intense, and often no matter how many photos you take or times you tell people back home, your friends and family and whoever about them, there's nothing like actually talking through those experiences with people that actually experience them at the same time as you. And those are the people that the fellow travellers that you meet along the way. And yeah, kind of it's for me, certainly, I think probably for lots of people, travel's a formative experience, right? It shapes who we are, it shapes how we see the world, shapes what we want to do with our lives. And yeah, when you're doing all these things for the first time, particularly in some of the most dramatic places on Earth, it forms a bond. And I certainly meet people that have done things with 5 years ago, 10 years ago, longer than that ago. And when when you're talking about those experiences, you're right back there, right? You can smell it and taste it and hear it and viscerally feel it. Yeah. So, and
also, I think it's quite interesting because you also, I can accept that maybe you might not see these people again in real life, right? Because I guess some people might crave to get that experience again, but I think there's a certain beauty where you just have that core experience. Could be Inca Trail, could be an example, right? Real hard hike, 4 or 5 days. You get to see Machu Picchu before anyone else, like on that day, and it's like a shared experience. But you might not ever see those people again. Like that group I did that tour with, apart from my friend from Norwich, I haven't seen any of them. But the connection's there on social media, and I'm sure if tomorrow that group go back together again, I'm sure it'll be back into Inca Trail mode, right? So it is also nice to leave it there and accept that was a great experience at that time, and not try and recreate something that maybe can't happen.
And sometimes the experiences are valuable because they're finite, right?
Of course,
they're fleeting. They're in the moment. They're very strong and powerful and enjoyable. Yeah, it's kind of the fragile nature or the short-lived nature of them is what helps to give them meaning. And also, even if you don't see them in person, you'll pop up in photos,
a memory,
and their memories exactly when they're telling the stories and stuff. It's a great part of traveling, and it's a great an encouragement. I know a lot of people don't necessarily find it easy talking to strangers, and kind of I know it can feel a bit daunting, particularly if you're traveling on your own. But traveling is a great way of kind of being forced to step out of your comfort zone, right? You might not talk to sit on the tube in London and talk to the person next to you, right? As a Londoner, that's something weird. Exactly. That's something weird is happening, something suspicious is happening. If that, but when you're abroad, it kind of offers a bit of a, you can step away from the kind of those kind of norms and restrictions, either that society has or that puts on yourself, and you can kind of make those connections, make new friends, even if they're just friends for a few days on the.
But I think that's enough, right? I think that they can still be friends even with a few days on the road. That's
and also, what I know, I have I know at least one or two friends who have met their partners whilst travelling in one of them on a cruise to Antarctica, for example. So look, you never know. You never know where it's going to take you.
Yeah. And before we get to Uruguay, for Central America, is there a few countries that's really high on your list that you want to visit or you never visited before?
Yeah, I mean, two really stand out, because I've spent a lot of time in Costa Rica, which I love, which I recommend over the years. I'd love to go to and hope to put that this year to both Panama and to Belize as well.
Okay.
In particular, although I'd like to, time would allow a kind of a bit of a road trip throughout the isthmus. But yeah, particularly Panama and Belize, which I think are kind of particularly interesting places at the moment. Lots of good stories, beautifully varied as Central America is as a whole. And obviously the small size of the region means that you can, it's easy to visit more than one country on the same trip, even if you're there for a relatively short amount of time. So yeah, those two particularly. But I love a pupusa, so that I often travel on my stomach, so that might draw me draw me a bit further south from Belize and north from Panama.
I tried to get Belize into my trip, actually getting from Santa Ana. This is overland because I didn't want to fly, even though I did end up flying in the end. But I tried to get from Santa Ana through Guatemala to Belize, but that was long because I had to go through Mexico as well. I think buses wise, so it's just like 3 or 4 days of traveling on bus just to get to Belize. And I just thought, well, Belize is quite small. I think it's relatively close to here, so I think I'll leave it in the future. But I wanted to do the scenic flight over the Blue Hole because I'm not a diver, so I don't go in water. So the best thing for me is seeing it from above. So I wanted to do that, but I just couldn't make it work. So I think Belize and Panama, I think they're my top two in the region as well. I've never been to Costa Rica, but I think those two are probably my top two to go back to, I think. So that's on my list. So hopefully I make it there next year.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Okay, Montevideo, Uruguay. It's a capital city, which I think in South America, for the generic traveller or someone who's interested in travel, doesn't get a lot of traction as other big cities in the region. So you went there, I think last year, was it? Tell us why you went there and what is the feel of Montevideo? And I think for some people, even me, I don't even know I can't even imagine what it's like. What is as a city? Is it chilled? Is it busy? Is it lots of is it very sort of like atmospheric in terms of there's dust everywhere, or is it very clean? Like, give us a feel and a sense of the place.
Yeah, I mean, to take up the first thing you said, it's absolutely overlooked amongst travellers and within South America as a whole. Uruguay is a small country in South American terms, sandwiched between two much bigger, louder, brasher neighbours in terms of Brazil and Argentina. And Montevideo, in particular, is just across the River Plate from Buenos Aires, right? So there's massively more people in Buenos Aires than in the whole of Uruguay. So yeah, it often gets overlooked. It often, we touched on the Gringo Trail earlier. Montevideo doesn't fall into that, but it's an incredible place to visit. I've been visiting for about 15 years or so, back from when I was living in Buenos Aires, and it's an absolutely fascinating place. Buenos Aires sits on the banks of the River Plate, but it often feels that even though it grew up as a port and it's still a busy port now, it looks inwards. Inwards towards the land, towards the pampas, towards these huge ranches. Ranches and the pampas are a huge part of Uruguay as well. Montevideo feels a lot more like a beach resort, technically facing onto a river, but it feels a bit more like a beach resort, certainly areas of it. It's incredibly atmospheric. The Ciudad Vieja, the oldest part of the city, the old town, is on the tip of the peninsula, and it's an incredible place to walk around. Cobbled streets, beautifully atmospheric, crumbling 19th century architecture, street art and murals, huge murals that cover the whole sides of buildings, a huge part of it. Music is a big part of Montevideo, so alongside Buenos Aires, it's one of the birthplaces of tango. They don't tell you this in Buenos Aires, but it's,
no, of course not.
But it's absolutely true. And so you're walking along the streets, you'll regularly hear tango being played. You'll see Montevideans dancing tango. You're much more likely to see them carrying around a mate cup than a takeaway coffee.
Sure,
that's a big thing there. Overall, it's much smaller than Buenos Aires. It has a much more relaxed vibe to it. As I say, it has the beautiful architecture. It has these more modern waterside resorts. It's got long beaches. It's got a long rambla, a long pedestrianised promenade. That's a great place for running and walking the dog and pushing the pushchair and just wandering around with a mate and or an ice cream. Yeah, but it's a really interesting place. Within South America, it's always, in terms of the livability scales, it always ranks really highly, if not top.
Oh, right. Okay.
And, Brazil and Argentina, to put it mildly, have had tumultuous time in recent years. So you'll find a lot of Argentines and South Americans have relocated to the relative stability of Montevideo. It's a progressive city, in terms of LGBT rights, Uruguay as a whole, in terms of, recreational, marijuana use, which has, been legalized as well. So it's a progressive city. We've spoken before about football. That often our conversations often come around with it. Football is central to Uruguayan culture, it's central to Montevidean culture. Yeah. So when I was there to research like a city guide for National Geographic Traveller. But the first place I went after landing, checking into my hotel, was to walk up to the Estadio Centenario, which was the stadium that hosted the very first World Cup back in 1930 and is going to host the opening game of the 2030 World Cup 100 years later. And it's one of the world's great stadiums. Anyway, I couldn't take in a game while I was there, but I was able to have a wander around the stadium itself. They've got a fantastic museum there with stories of Uruguay's World Cup wins, signed shirts of the great South American players, many of whom you would have heard of, Maradona, of course. Some of the Uruguayans from a bit further back you may not have. But if you're even vaguely interested in sport, that's a great place to visit. Food wise, again, Uruguayans generally, the rankings vary, but if you can believe it, even more beef than the Argentines and the Brazilians. Yeah, I know. Yeah. It feels hard to believe. So the steakhouses there are a huge thing. Again, if you go to the Ciudad Vieja in some of the covered markets, there's some really good steakhouses, some very atmospheric places. But it's also it's a very walkable city, right? It's very safety is a difficult thing because there's often a lot of perception versus reality in South America, and a lot of outsiders often overly fearful of a place. But Montevideo feels a very safe place to visit and walk around. And it's got its own vibe. The other thing to go to do, now I went in May. Now if I'd gone a few months earlier, you can experience Carnival, right? So people, it's passed relatively recently in Rio, which most people, and Brazil more generally, people associate it with. Carnival's a thing across South America, and Uruguay actually has the longest carnival on the continent. Lasts around 40 days, I believe. Wow. So when I was there, you see some of the groups performing on the streets. There's a wide range of music, including something called candombe, which is drum-based music, really central to the city's culture, just as tango is. But you can go to parks on like a Sunday afternoon and watch them practice. If you go to the Ciudad Vieja, you see them walking down the streets and practicing, and this kind of builds to a flourish during the carnival. So I got a bit of a taste of it from seeing some of the practice sessions, from going to the Great Carnival Museum, which is in the Ciudad Vieja. But definitely on my to-do list for the next visit is to get out for carnival time itself and to kind of experience that firsthand.
Okay. But as we're on carnival, quick question about tango. It's a bit random. Yeah. If you're visiting for the first time, like I would, and you maybe want to do like a week's worth or a couple of days worth of like classes, like real beginner, are they quite easy to find if you just want to learn a bit of tango? And then I guess that the aim is to learn a bit and then maybe go to like a tango club or something and then just to kind of watch it, maybe join in. I don't know if that's possible as well.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is absolutely yes. In both Montevideo and in Buenos Aires. Yeah. There's lots of like beginner classes. If you just want a taster session, you've never done it before, you can just do like a few hours and you'll be showing the basics. But if you're keener, you can certainly do more, depth courses. There's lots and lots of tango shows. There's very famous kind of fancy ones where you'll sit down for like a 3-course dinner and you'll watch. Wow. You'll watch it. You can go to much more lower key but very atmospheric, like neighborhood, what they call milongas, so like kind of tango dance events where you can watch just regular people just dancing. You can very much try yourself, try your moves if you've learned a bit, and you do see it on the street as well. I mean, you see it both aimed at tourists, so people the equivalent of buskers, but kind of tango dancing. But you also see, and this is one of my favourite experiences in Montevideo. I was just walking down the street, one of the main shopping streets in the city centre, and just in one of the little plazas near a restaurant, someone had put out like a boombox, and they were playing some classic tango songs, and there was just a group of people who just gathered together, 10, 15 together, and were just dancing. It wasn't not for money or anything, just because it was a lovely, it was a lovely evening. Yeah. It was the weekend, and it's a beautiful thing. And so those kind of experiences, all the way up to very elaborate, fancy, the equivalent of a West End show style tango show, you can do. And actually, once you get out, once you get to, this is absolutely true for Buenos Aires at all. You really see that. Although it's a huge part of the tourist literature and the tourist promotion for these places, it's also part of people's lives.
Yeah, of course.
People's ordinary lives. And and it's definitely worth... tango has a very, very interesting origins. It draws on all of the cultures that have, formed these countries, European, African, indigenous, right? So it's a really, it's both kind of a cliched image of particularly of Argentina, but also a very real and central part of culture on the River Plate.
I think you just want to go there and just watch a show, or at least go somewhere local and just kind of feel the energy, right? You want to just hear the music, the classic tango music, maybe throw a few moves in there if you're confident. But I just want to go there and just kind of have a night where I just watch some tango dancers and soak up the atmosphere and the music and have some good food. It sounds like a quality classic South American night out, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And it was when I've been to lots of tango shows. I've tried, mainly without success, to learn a few moves. But despite however many times I'd done it, I went to when I was in Montevideo this time, I went to a great little show in the Ciudad Vieja, which is slightly fancier in the terms I had sat down for a delicious dinner, but kind of. It was quite an intimate venue, very atmospheric, historic building. It was wonderful dancers, wonderful musicians performing around you. And also went to the Palacio Salvo, which is one of the most amazing buildings in the city, one of the most amazing buildings in any South American city. This huge kind of tower, kind of lighthouse style tower, and that was the site of one of one of the most famous tango songs was first written. Yeah, it's a living culture. And in Montevideo, the same with candombe music, which is also similarly powerful, also great for dancing too, also central to the culture that most visitors won't be super familiar with. I wasn't super familiar with before I went, but that's another thing that again you can see people practicing on the streets. You can see and awesome. if you're lucky enough to be there during Carnival time, basically around this, the build up to Easter, then you can see it in all its glory and definitely get stuck in yourself.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's got to be on the list. And if people are now thinking, okay, I want to go to Uruguay for more of an admin perspective, can you fly direct from Europe? If not, what is the most common route? And in terms of accommodation, we're going to go with accommodation in Montevideo. Is there hostels? Is there budget hotels? Or is it very mid-range?
Yeah, so you can fly direct from Europe, not direct from the UK at the moment, but you can go direct from Europe. Often you'll fly via Sao Paulo, via Buenos Aires as well. So it's relatively easy to get out there. You can also fly to Buenos Aires and just get the ferry across the River Plate as well.
Yeah.
So that's another way if you want to see Buenos Aires at the same time. It's a fun and very easy journey to do. And in terms of the accommodation, all of the above. If you're looking for a hostel, if you're looking for an inexpensive hotel, there's plenty of options. There's lots of mid-range mid-range independent hotels. Really, for as any travel writer will tell you, that's really you can judge the quality of your accommodation in any given destination by how good and how available those kind of mid-range places are. Yeah, and there's lots and lots of high-end options as well. Yeah, so I've in the past I've stayed in the Ciudad Vieja in the very atmospheric old town. I've stayed in like a budget hotel there, but really you go up in one of these traditional cage lifts that was built at the start of the 20th century. It creaks and judders, and you get into, so, and then you open up onto a balcony that overlooks these busy cobbled streets, looks out onto plazas and stuff like that. And, nearby you get the, very fancy boutique hotels that have, renovated these, these historic townhouses, these mansions, palacios, as you would sometimes say there as well. So there's lots and lots of accommodation options, and it's easy to get to, but you often have to travel via somewhere else en route.
Okay, I'm going to touch on currency, because you might come from Argentina, which is notoriously, how can we say this? It's just a bit nuts with the currency, isn't it?
Turbulent,
yeah. The Uruguayan currency, I don't know what it is. I guess it's more stable. And how does it work if you're going from Argentina across the river from Buenos Aires to Montevideo? Like the exchange rates, and you might have some Argentinian money left over, or is it best to have US dollars? Like, what's the best for that?
Yeah, I mean, generally, my advice in this would be always, almost anywhere you go, that even despite the current context that we're talking in, a stash of US dollars, that you have with you is always useful wherever you're going. As you say, the currency situation in Argentina is in flux at the moment. Volatile. It's a long question, it's a long answer to tell to give you advice on what to do when you're going to Argentina. But the short thing is, when you're leaving Argentina, don't travel with try to spend all your physical currency, Argentine currency while you're there, because they've had hyperinflation recently. So spend it all there. Uruguay, by contrast, much more stable. Right, so I tell you, when I was there, I didn't use any physical Uruguayan currency at all. Everything I paid for by card,
digital?
And the only thing that I would have had it, so I didn't even bother in over the whole trip of actually taking anything out. The only time it would have been useful was for getting a bus. Okay, right, so the buses you had to pay with in cash. I was lucky; I got a nice bus driver who let me on anyway.
Yeah.
Otherwise, in your time, certainly in Montevideo, if you're travelling out into the countryside a bit more, then obviously it'll be useful to have cash. But otherwise, very, very easy. Just using your card for everything. Big and small transactions.
Okay, and I want to touch very quickly on the other part of the countries. The other part of the country of Uruguay. We talked Montevideo. I think there's lots to see and do there, but is there other places in the country that's on your list, or you might have visited before, which are definitely worth visiting, or at least trying out for the first time?
Yeah, lots of places. When people think of Argentina, they often think of the Pampas, right? Yeah. The huge, nearly endless grasslands populated by these huge cattle ranches. The Pampas as an ecosystem also extends into, is also part of Uruguay. Cattle ranches are a huge part of. Again, the identity and the culture as well. So getting out into the Pampas, staying on a cattle ranch, learning about, seeing firsthand the gaucho lifestyle, going horse riding, having an asado, so like a steak barbecue, basically. Just kicking back for a few days in beautiful surroundings. That's very much a part of it. Easy to do in Uruguay. Uruguay is also famous for its coastline. Right, it's got lots of beach resorts. Punta del Este being the most famous, but by no means the only one. So it's very easy to get out to the coast. I've done a bit of that, but when I go back, that's something I'd like to do more of. It's also got some quirky attractions. So Fray Bentos, which for British listeners will be a familiar name. Fray Bentos is a town in Uruguay. It's the town behind the pies. Basically, to cut a very long story short, it was home to a huge meatpacking plant, revolutionary meatpacking plant that produced one of the most famous British food brands of the 20th century, and that plant is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Right, sounds like a very unlikely tourist attraction. It's kind of semi-crumbling, but anyway, it's a fascinating place to visit as well. So you've got Uruguay's got a real mix of places to see and do. If you want the urban experience, great. If you want the beach, great. If you want to kick back on a ranch, great. If you want to delve into some unusual history, and if you're interested in architecture, if you're interested in Victorian engineering, if you're just interested in going to unlikely places and getting an insight into a history that you may not know. It's also got all of that kind of stuff as well.
Okay. And we're going to transition to train travel. But my last question, Uruguay, any train travel available in the country?
You know what? Now you may have caught me out a bit. There's nothing that springs to mind. If you go to, if you go to Montevideo, there's some incredible old train stations.
Okay.
A lot of them have British links because there's a strong British connection with the railways. So internally within the city, you have some train routes, but if you're getting around, realistically, you're getting coaches, buses, or self-drive, but the railway heritage lives on, obviously in Peñarol, which is one of the most famous Uruguayan and Montevidean football teams, one of the most successful football teams in South America, strong railway heritage there. Okay. Anyone interested in that should delve into the origins of that particular club. But yeah, sadly, it's not a place of great railway journeys.
Okay, no worries. We'll pop next door then to Tren del Fin del Mundo. So I think translation is train of the end of the world, I think. Is that?
Yeah, end of the world train. Yeah.
Okay. And you've done this before, and it's situated in Argentina, and it used to serve the prison in Ushuaia, right? So I guess now it's a tourist attraction. Is it like not a toy train, but like you just go on there, it's quite slow, and it goes through the countryside and you get your views of the surrounding areas, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, just to geographically locate it...
Yeah, it's not next door to Montevideo.
Yeah, so it is just across the border in Argentina, but it is thousands of kilometres south, right? It's in Tierra, Fuego. It's in the city of Ushuaia, which Argentines will often tell you is the southernmost city on Earth. Technically, it's not. There's the smaller city of Puerto Williams in Chile, which is technically the southernmost city on Earth. Nevertheless, it is a long way south, right? It is much closer to Antarctica. Antarctica's barely 1,000 kilometers away from it. Buenos Aires, by contrast, is much more than that.
Oh wow!
It's also the southern end of the Pan American Highway. So all of those people that start off in Alaska on camper vans and in motorbikes. That's the finishing point. And the end of the world is a slogan within Ushuaia, which is backed by the Andes. It overlooks the Beagle Channel, a fascinating place. Now, today is mainly known as, most people go to get an Antarctic cruise. They're either getting on or disembarking from an Antarctic cruise. But when the Argentine government was colonising that area, which kind of took place in the late 19th, early 20th century, it was difficult persuading people, Argentines, to go and settle in an area that had been inhabited by indigenous peoples for many thousands of years, I should say. So the Argentine government set up a penal colony. So Ushuaia basically was a penal colony, and that was central to the expansion of the settlement into a town, and the town into the city that's there now. And in the early 20th century, the prisoners in what was known as the Siberia of the South. I mean, the prison is now a museum. You can walk around, fascinating place into the history of the region, and you can stand inside some of these cells, and they are absolutely bitterly cold.
Yeah.
Very harsh conditions. So even though the prisoners were forced to work on the railway, some of them were, pleased to have the opportunity to get out of the cells. Certainly that's according to some of the testimony that they've left behind. One of them said, "At least I can see the sunshine. I can see the sky when I'm working on doing the back-breaking labour building the train route." The train route essentially was just used to transport timber from the surrounding forests, very lush forests, into the centre of Ushuaia, and that was used to build Ushuaia, right? It was used to build and expand the prison, right? The prisoners were building their own cells, which feels like a bit of a painful irony, indeed. And the conditions there were really, really harsh. So inevitably, some of these prisoners, and these were some of the most notorious prisoners in Argentina, murderers, also political prisoners like anarchists, revolutionaries, a real range of people. Some of them tried to escape whilst building it, and generally came a cropper in the harsh environment.
Of course.
Anyway, the train ran for decades. It played a central part of the growth of Ushuaia. But like railways across South America, it gradually fell out of use. It was also damaged by an earthquake, and so kind of from like in the 1950s or so, it was no longer in use. Fast forward to the 1990s, and it was renovated, or a certain section of the line was renovated, and it now runs from a station just outside Ushuaia. into the surrounding national park, Park National Tierra del Fuego. And it is a bit of a tourist line, right? You know, it has steam trains that go along it, beautifully maintained steam trains. Yeah. Tourists run it because it's not super convenient. Sorry, tourists ride it because it's not super convenient for anything else. It stops at these stations along the route, and there's people in prison costumes and stuff that will, you know, put on a bit of a show for you, plenty of opportunities to buy souvenirs, all of that kind of stuff too. But it's still an incredibly atmospheric and rewarding and enjoyable journey because it takes you to beautiful Andean landscapes. And it's also, it gives you an insight into really what life was like at the quote unquote, the end of the world. And then you end up in the national park, which is also a great place for hiking, a great place for bird watching, great place for getting an insight into the indigenous heritage of South America, of Tierra del Fuego, because you can also see these middens, which are these huge mounds that have been made up of discarded mollusk shells that were left behind by members of the Yargan community, you know, hundreds, thousands of years. So it's a fun route to take. And plus, if you take it, you can say that you've travelled on the southernmost railway on Earth.
Yeah. And do people do return journeys? Because I'm just imagining you might get on close to Ushuaia, but you want to come back there because you're probably based in Ushuaia. So do people go one way? Do they stay a night or do a little trek, or do they come straight back?
It's easy to do. It's easy to do as a day trip. As I say, now the route is not super convenient. It used to run into the centre of Ushuaia. Now it runs from just outside. You either have to get like a local minibus and get a taxi, and then it takes you into a station inside the national parks. So you can either just go and come back, or you can get off in the national park, which I'd highly recommend, and then just go hiking for the day, or overnight, and then you can return either via the train or by later on. Okay.
And on my research, it did say this year they plan to connect back into Ushuaia. I don't know if that's still going to go ahead or if they're going to move the line further inwards. It'd kind of make it a bit more sense to do that because tourists are based there, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say hopefully so. I think it would definitely make sense from a practicality sense. It would definitely encourage more people to ride it. It would also be a lot more useful for getting to and from the national park as well. Sure. It would be easily the most enjoyable way of getting to and from the national park if it ran from the centre. And it runs throughout the year, 365 days a year. Whenever you go, you travelling through it in the snow is spectacular. Travelling through it in the summer is great if you want to go hiking. So yeah, hopefully that extension will come to pass.
And is it easy to book, or does it get booked out pretty quickly?
It's easy to book. You can go to the website and do that. You can do it at if your hotel, your hostel, lots of travel agencies in Ushuaia will do the bookings for you. Some will also arrange transfers for you to get to and from the station. You can also do that on some like the minibuses that run to the national park as well, or you can just split a taxi with someone. So yeah, so it's very easy. It's very easy to do. It's aimed at tourists. It's a bit kitsch, but it's but really good fun. And
it's the southernmost railway in the world, so it's pretty cool to say that. What's the northernmost then? Do you know what that is?
Now you've asked me. Yeah, that's a tester. I don't know. I hope you've got the answer hidden away somewhere. But
I have not. No.
Definitely one to look into.
I feel like I should Google it, but I think it's bad podcasting if I do that. I'm just trying to think. You know, the northernmost countries. It's got to be somewhere, probably Canada, Norway, or Russia, right? Just by geography.
Yes, I would guess so. And probably, you know, it was probably built. You know, whichever the northern one is, it was probably built for a similar reason as the Tren del Mundo to transport, transport timber and to aid settlements, maybe to work mines. But yeah, I look forward to hearing in the next podcast the answer to that question.
It does go in nicely to my next comment for train travel because we have a train ride on our list here. It's based in Winnipeg and it goes up to Churchill. It's a 2-night train ride. It's between $300 to $500 per person, Canadian dollars, depending what class you go in. And the reason it's worth doing is because obviously train ride is great, but when you get to Churchill, that's where you see the polar bears. And because polar bears don't hibernate, in theory you can see them all year round. So I do wonder if that maybe might be on your list if you go to Canada to pop to Winnipeg and do the train ride up, because you can't really get to Churchill any other way, I'd imagine, especially in the non-summer months. You could probably fly, I'd imagine, but I'm not sure how regular they are.
Yeah, well, I mean, funny enough, I did actually do I visited Churchill a few years back. Sadly, didn't get to go on the train ride. I was on a slightly tight research trip schedule, so I flew in a spectacular flight, but absolutely the train is the best way to travel in. And to go back, I would love to go by train. And about the polar bears, we went in the middle of the summer, which is not normally not the key time to see them.
Yeah,
and saw them, and the beluga whales in the Hudson Bay as well, which often overshadowed by the polar bears.
That's incredible.
But to go out kayaking with them was an incredible experience. They're very playful, almost like dolphins in terms of their playfulness. So Churchill is a remarkable place on many levels, and seeing the polar bears is a great privilege. But definitely don't sleep on the beluga whales. They're really
I don't know.
A fun. Really going kayaking with them on the Hudson Bay. Really memorable experience.
God, that's a great tip. I didn't realise, because I was speaking to people about this and like, well, why would you go in the summer? Because bears are sort of hibernating, and they hibernate in the winter here. But I was like, well, polar bears don't hibernate; they just stay awake all year round. And I think some people were terrified by that. But I think Churchill is it's one of the best places to see them if you just want to see it in a non-organised way. You probably could stay there for a couple of days and you might get a chance to see one, or at least book a little tour locally.
Well, I mean, Churchill famously bills itself as the polar bear capital of the world, and although this didn't happen during my visit, polar bears do just wander through the town as well, right? It's not unknown. So, residents will leave their like car doors and, front doors unlocked because, someone's passing by, sees a polar bear, needs a safe exit. So it really is. It's a fascinating place, many levels. But if you're interested in polar bears, Churchill's the place.
I'm surprised they haven't learned how to open those doors yet.
Well, I mean, it could happen. I mean, they've certainly got into they've certainly broken into like food stores, storage places and stuff as well. So they're quite innovative, creative, clever creatures,
and scary because they're huge, much bigger than the grizzlies, I think. Okay, back to trains. What are your next maybe top 3 train routes you'd love to do worldwide? Well, not train routes, but maybe even a country you want to travel by train. Is there anywhere in your top 3 list?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky through co-authoring the Rough Guide to India for many years, and I got to travel on many Indian trains. Spent days and days, maybe even weeks in total of my life on trains. So anyone, despite having had quite a lot of experience on trains in India, always going. I haven't done it for a few years. I'd love to go back and and do some more. The travel writer Manisha Rajesh wrote a great book on train travel in India, and there's lots and lots of kind of recommendations in that. Not least because the food is the food is great on them as well. Yeah. So that's definitely up there on them. Another train journey that I did is the GAN in Australia, which kind of goes from Darwin to Adelaide through Alice Springs. Now, there's the same company also does the Indian Pacific, which goes the other way rather from east to west rather than from north to south. I would love to do that. So that's definitely on my hit list. And then to take one a bit more local to you, the Rocky Mountaineer as well. I've had friends who've done it. The scenery looks spectacular. So that would definitely be on my list as well. I'm already giving you too many here, but there's the Reunification Express that goes through the length of Vietnam as well. I mean, it's a collection of routes, a collection of railway routes that go from again north to south. I'd love to do that. I haven't been back to Vietnam for a while now. So it's train travel. We could waffle on for hours about the pleasures of it. Obviously, even more so from a sustainability point of view, and it's definitely something I've been trying to do a bit more, in both my personal travel as well as my work travel. And kind of one of my most recent trips was going to Belgium with my dad, and which we went on Eurostar, which was great. And the next trip, the rare travel writer holiday down through France to to the Basque Country will also be by
train?
by train.
Oh wow,
as well.
Great. Are you interested in the sort of East Asian fast trains? You know, the Shinkansen, the Chinese railway network, South Korea we travelled on as well. Like the real fast trains. Are you interested in that as well?
Oh yeah, I mean very much so. I mean I've had a brief and very rapid taste of the Shinkansen in Japan, and absolutely loved it. And you know, I mean one of the, you know, I'm an inveterate reader, and before, you know, a kid as a teenager when I was reading about travel, used to love the books of Paul Theroux, right? The Great Patagonian Express, famously, you know, helped to fire my love of South America. But the Great Railway Bazaar, which he goes all the way from not too far from where I am here in southeast London, all the way over to you know, to China, right in the Red Rooster, I think it is. Anyway, but yeah. So I would love to ride, you know, some of the trains in China as well, which I haven't done at all. I'm very under-travelled in China, and I would love to do. Yeah, I'd love to get back over to Japan. That's another place on the list. And because the trains in both countries and famously in Japan are so good that it just opens up the country to you. You can see a lot more.
Yeah.
In a relatively short space of time. The food is also great on them, and at the stations, right, picking up a bento box and getting on the Shinkansen is, you know, these are great travel experiences in and of themselves, right? Almost regardless of where you're going. So yeah, you know, I'd love to do that. You know, the Trans-Siberian Railway as well. Yeah. Of course, if you've got a bit more time, and you know, maybe if the you know, the political climate shifts a little bit, you know, that would be. You know, that would be something that definitely be on my list. One of my most memorable journeys years and years ago, right? You know, it was back in 2008. It was, right, which feels like another lifetime. Was taking the Taurus Express, which ran from Istanbul to Aleppo.
Oh wow!
Obviously doesn't run anymore for, you know, for obvious reasons. But that was a historic line that used to run all the way to Baghdad. Agatha Christie rode on it and wrote about it. You know, that takes you up through the Taurus Mountains in Turkey before you cross to, you know, Aleppo, you know, one of the oldest inhabited cities on earth. When I visited, one of the most amazing places I've ever visited, and obviously, you know, the ravages of the civil war in Syria has kind of transformed it, and, you know, destroyed it and destroyed many of the people that, you know, that live there. But, you know, there's incredible, you know, lots and lots of incredible train journeys. Yes,
not to get stuck on with.
There's a lot. This is the great pleasure of travel, right? You asked me a simple question, right? You wisely tried to limit my answer, which I, you know, flagrantly ignored and just, you know, rambled on. But I think that's the thing. It's both about travel and about trains, right? People love, you know, there's something about going, traveling that way, right?
It's quite a unique feeling, isn't it? It's hard to describe. I don't know what it is. It's just something really nice about it. Is that because we're from UK and we kind of grew up with trains? I'm not sure, but there's something about it.
Yeah, I mean, although really anyone who's travelled on UK trains really would be rightly justified in hating them as a form of transport. True. But you know, there's a great Paul Theroux quote, which is, you know, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but I've never heard a train go past without wishing I was on it. You know, and I think that's true, right? It's a very romantic form of travel. It's you see the changing landscapes gradually shift as you're on it in a way that you don't on a plane, right? You're just picked up in one generic airport, you land in another generic airport somewhere else. And one of the heartening things certainly in mainland Europe at the moment is to see the expansion of new routes, of new sleeper trains, you know, cross-border trains as well, which is really exciting. Lots and lots of those I'd like to do too. So yeah, I don't know if it's a second age of railways, but certainly there's lots of positive developments, certainly in Europe.
I feel like it could come back properly. It's always been there, but I think as we go hopefully into a greener part of the life cycle of Earth, I think we would recreate some of those train routes if the political situation calms down a little bit, but obviously it's a big if. But have you seen on social media that classic route that I guess is like an easy clickbait thing where you go from Portugal, is it all the way to Singapore? Is that like longest train ride you can do from one place to another? I don't know the logistics of that or where it even goes through, but I keep thinking in my head that'd be great to have that sort of journey under your belt, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, I've seen it, and it's as you say, it's clickbait. But you also think, that'd be a great journey, right? Yeah. And we you all dream about packing everything up, running off, catching a train, traveling, from Europe to Asia, as Paul Theroux did, in those books. But yeah, you definitely can. I recently reviewed a book by the travel writer Tom Cheshire, who's written a lot about train travel, which is him taking essentially travelling the Orient Express route, but taking a more budget version, using kind of Eurail passes, right? And it's just an interesting book, and also kind of opens your eyes to all of these little train routes that you might not have thought about, and also the encounters, the people that you meet along the way, which again seems easier to it's easier to strike up conversation perhaps on a train than it is on a on a flight or whatever. God,
it's just the thought of that route. I know it's huge, but let's say you just have, I don't know, a 3-hour or 4-hour time limit a day of traveling, and wherever that stops, that's just where you're going to be for the day and night. That's pretty cool, because you have no idea where you're going to end up, because you don't know what the distance is and where that goes to and from, right? I don't even know where it starts in Portugal, right, and where it goes next. So I think that type of travel is it's very wanderlust, isn't it? If you think about it.
And also, I mean, the way you describe it as well, which also appeals to me, is kind of not having everything planned out. Having a starting point and having a rough end point, but not having everything absolutely booked, right? Which is kind of it's probably more difficult to do now, but kind of certainly that was kind of my experience when I first started backpacking, right? And in South America, I had a flight into Rio for Carnival, had a flight out of Buenos Aires, some 6 months later, 5-6 months later, and how you got from one to the other was kind of completely up to you. And I think and train travel probably makes that a bit more accessible than other forms of transport. Certainly than flying. I mean, some of the most famous long distance routes you need to book in advance, but a lot of the trains, certainly within Europe and Asia, you can sometimes just turn up on the day, but certainly with not too much forethought, you can plan across. In somewhere like India, right? If you just turn up, you may end up in third class on the hard seats. You might not necessarily get the 3AC sleepers. Which different experiences I can attest from.
Absolutely, yeah. Experienced that before.
Personal journeys as well. But that's part of it, right? Sure. It's not necessarily always comfortable in the moment, but they're often richer experiences in kind of. Sometimes when you've recovered from it, you look back on it fondly.
I think that's a good Wing in It series, potentially. We'll see. I'll keep that in my mind. Yeah. Okay, and you mentioned the book earlier, which leads us nicely into your book. So you've got a new book coming out in the summer, right? In July, maybe? It's called Small Earthquakes. Tell us a bit about the premise and what the idea behind the book is.
Yeah, so it's out in, I think it's on the 24th of July, and it's Small Earthquakes, a journey through lost British history in South America. And in some ways, the origins of it date back to my very first trip to South America as a backpacker. Ended up in Buenos Aires and fell in love with the place. I mean, that journey prompted me to become a travel writer. It prompted me to live for a year in Buenos Aires. It prompted me to focus on Latin America. But while I was there, where I was staying, there were streets with names like Darwin and Fitzroy. And when I was walking down Calle Florida, one of the main shopping streets, there was an old Howard's store, closed, shuttered, a bit dusty, lots of pigeons. Well, that's a bit odd. And then when I went to the newsstands, there was a Buenos Aires Herald newspaper, English language newspaper. Going to one of the bars and watching a football match, thought, that's funny. River Plate, one of the two most famous clubs in Argentina. I wonder why they've got an English name. I wonder why Newell's Old Boys, a football team in the city of Rosario, have got that name. Anyway, so that was the initial inkling. I thought I didn't know much about this at the time. And anyway, scroll forward to the present, and all of my travels in South America, wherever I went, I started picking up little bits of unlikely British connections. I thought I didn't really know much about British history in South America. It was never taught to me in school. Guyana was a British colony. People know about the Falklands. People know about the rivalry with, Argentina and Maradona and the Hand of God at the 1986 World Cup.
Yeah.
Diego Simeone and David Beckham and all of that kind of stuff. But, I didn't really know much more about it. But everywhere I went, I found these unusual, unexpected, and in some cases profound British connections, right? We talked about Fray Bentos in Uruguay, which, won't go into too much detail to save the spice from the book, but that's a place, strong British connections, and it changed the way that we eat in this country, in the UK, and the way the world eats. If you go to Buenos Aires, just across the River Plate, really strong British heritage. There was a big British population there. There's still still a sizable Anglo-Argentine population there, and that had a big cultural impact. Football would be a classic example of that. Yeah. And my book focuses on Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile. In all of those countries, the origin stories of football, were through British immigrants, right? So I'm a Liverpool supporter. There's another Liverpool in Uruguay, in Montevideo.
Yeah, there is.
Right?
Yeah.
Now there's also there's an Everton in South America, all the way over in Chile, in Viña del Mar. So technically you can have a South American Merseyside derby there. And these are just some of the most obvious, British connections. But if you go to Patagonia, right, you get to Argentine Patagonia, to the northeastern point, and you'll find a Welsh-speaking community there, right? Yeah. One of the only places outside of Wales where you hear Welsh being spoken. And they're famous within Argentina for the Welsh tea rooms, in which you'll go down and you'll sit to a hearty array of cakes and pastries and tea served in these traditional Welsh Patagonian tea rooms. And that dates back to 1865, when a converted tea clipper called the Mimosa travelled across the Atlantic and took a group of Welsh settlers who wanted to create a new life, a Wales beyond Wales, in Patagonia, right? If Patagonia, the economy developed, after that in the 20th century, off sheep ranching, right? The first sheep that were brought to Patagonia were by a Yorkshireman, right? Down in what's now the Chilean side of it, and British, shepherds, ranch managers, British capital was fundamental to sheep ranching, the sheep ranching boom in Patagonia, right? Whose legacy is still felt today. Across the Strait of Magellan into Tierra del Fuego. I talked about the southernmost city on Earth, right? In Chile, just across the water from Ushuaia, Puerto Williams, right?
Yeah,
Williams. Yeah, right. So that's a connection to one of the many British sailors and also soldiers who fought in South America's, in the armies, in the armed forces of South American countries. If you go almost anywhere in Chile, from Tierra del Fuego all the way up to the Atacama Desert, you'll find a street named Cochrane, and that's from Lord Cochrane, who was a central part of the Royal Navy, and then left in disgrace, and then played a fundamental role found in the Chilean Navy and also in the Brazilian Navy, and helped those countries claim their independence.
Wow.
And then you've got to go to Easter Island. As a kid, I loved to go to the British Museum. Parents would take me, and I was captivated by the Easter Island statue there, the Moai there. That's got a British connection as well. And so I spent some time in Easter Island, one of the most amazing places on Earth, with a very strong British connection to that history, including to this particular Moai. And it's the same, obviously, across from the Pacific all the way to the Atlantic, to the islands of the Falkland Islands and to South Georgia. Falkland Islands, everyone knows that history. Yeah. There's more to it than just the war. And then South Georgia, which is further south, another fascinating history as well. Yeah. Scottish whaling companies that turned it into a central part of the global economy at the time, and whose now the rusting whaling stations have been recolonised by lots of the species that wanted to the brink of extinction. So those are some of the stories that my book explores, basically. So it's a journey through all of these stories, and it's kind of tells you a bit about the history, it tells you about the contemporary resonance of them, and it kind of looks into a bit about why, for lots of people, certainly in the UK, maybe a bit less so in parts of South America, why this is a new history. Yeah. And also, one of the things that I liked is that whilst I was researching, like, you always set off with an idea before writing a book. You set off with an idea of what you want to write, and then a bit like travel, you know, the journey takes you in unexpected directions. And everywhere where I went, and even in some of the most inhospitable and remotest places on Earth, in the midst of the Atacama Desert, for example, you know, in far southern reaches of Tierra del Fuego, I found these odd connections to home, not just to the UK, but to me in South London. So I've weaved into the book some of those experiences, and and hopefully readers will also find, certainly in the UK, will find some unexpected connections to, you know, their own lives, to the places that they grew up in as well.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? Because you think lazily maybe that it's just the Spanish and the Portuguese history down there because of the colonisation. It's such a this is why it piqued my interest. It's like, what we really had a big say in the history of the whole place, right? I just don't think, maybe apart from football, you don't think there's much else going on. And obviously the Falklands that you mentioned, but I'm really intrigued to go and read this book, because I'm like, well, what else did we sort of sneakily get involved in while we're down there? Or start off, you know, with the sheep. The sheep story is incredible with that. I know it sounds a bit weird, but like, they had no sheep before we took them there. That's a bit crazy, right? Considering how big the whole farming thing is now, right? So crazy story. So a lot to get stuck into.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, the sheep story is fascinating because it's central. You know, you immediately associate it with Patagonia, but they were absolutely they were introduced initially by a Yorkshireman as well. And you know, there's a strong British role in the cattle ranching industry as well in across these countries. So I was fascinated by the history, and you know, the more that I explored, the deeper I found it. And also that it dates back 450 years, right? It's, you know, some of the Spanish conquistadors that founded Buenos Aires, in their crew were British sailors in Ferdinand Magellan's famous circumnavigation of the Earth, even though Magellan actually died en route, so he didn't actually complete it. But on that voyage, there were British sailors as well. You know, Francis Drake. You know, very famous people. Lots and lots of, you know, is famous. His name was used as a warning to scare misbehaving kids on the Pacific coast of Chile. Such was his legacy hundreds of years later, and it's a similar story for other British pirates as well. It's Charles Darwin, of course, whose voyage around South America changed the world, and also changed various parts of South America too. So there's lots. It's a rich history, and even though the footballing story is great, it's more than football, and it's the Falkland story is also interesting and important too. It's more than that, and there's lots of connections with the railway as well, particularly in Argentina.
Yes, I was going to circle back to the
strong
train
British
stuff.
Connection with it.
Yeah, because obviously it started in the UK, right? There must be some sort of connection going to South America and building it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's a bit of a shame now if you traveling in modern day South America, there's only fragmented railway lines, and some of, you know, there's the Tren del Mundo, which we mentioned. There's the Tren de la Costa in Buenos Aires, which goes to the resort town of Tigre on the Paraná Delta, which is a great route, but is again a more of a touristy route. You know, you've got the route that goes from Cusco to Machu Picchu. You've got various kind of like high-end trains in Peru and stuff. But the train network used to be much wider across South America. You know, and this was something I wrote about in my first book, Crossed Off the Map, which focused on Bolivia. The high altitude trains that still run across the Salar de Uyuni, the highest salt flats, the biggest salt flats on Earth. Again, they have British origins. And if you go to Buenos Aires today, if you go to Retiro, which is the main train station, and there's also an area in Buenos Aires, the main train station will look kind of familiar if you know London, if you've ever been through St Pancras. Very similar. And you know, a lot of that railway heritage dates back to British investment. A lot of the railway companies were British or Anglo-Argentine. A lot of the engineers were British as well, and that transformed Argentine history, made a lot of people in Britain very wealthy, caused quite a bit of unhappiness as well. Has fed into you know, the somewhat fractious Argentine-British relationships that exist to this day. Not the only cause, but that's part of the history, and that's something that a lot of British people won't necessarily know. No. Argentines will often know about it.
They sure will let
South
you know.
Americans will often know about its heritage. But yeah, so it's kind of, I think, particularly for British people, British travellers to South America, you'll hopefully learn a bit more about your own history, our own history, as well as South America's, and kind of see that it's actually a shared history, right? Sometimes bad, sometimes good, sometimes depends on your perspective. And also, I'm talking to you from London, so the Latin American population in the UK is one of the fastest growing.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Kind of ethnic communities in the UK, and the vast majority of them are in London. So we're talking about pupusas. There's as I said, there's a new pupusa joint, a Salvadoran restaurant that's opened up near me in southeast London. If you travel down the Old Kent Road, not just a Monopoly stop.
Yeah,
an incredible place to go and eat Latin American food, as well as Middle Eastern food and West African food as well. And there's more of a slowly from the awareness of British Latin Americans or Anglo Latin Americans or Latinx British people. However, lots of different terms. There's more awareness of that community as well. So I think it's not just history. It's a fascinating history, but it's also there's no full stop. It continues to develop, and I think as it continues to develop, it'll be useful as well as interesting to be a bit more aware about how it all started.
I think also this is a huge subject, and people are going to have to read your book. But one more question on the book, talking about sport. Did you actually touch on rugby? Because I think football is a bit of an easy one to imagine. It's worldwide. But rugby is a niche sport within the UK. Not many people play it. I certainly have not played it. I think it's maybe due to social status. I think it's more of a upper middle class sport. But weirdly and interestingly, Argentina are really good at rugby, and that must be a connection there as well.
Yeah. No, absolutely. To cut a long story short, I mean, there were the British school system, Anglo-Argentine schools, based on the British model, helped to introduce British sports or sports that had originated in Britain. Obviously, football being the classic example, but rugby, polo as well. An example. Cricket was also used to be played as well. So to tie into when we're talking about Montevideo, right? You can go to a museum in Montevideo that's dedicated to the Uruguayan rugby team that famously crashed in the Andes.
Oh yeah, of course.
And a very made into but it's Society of the Snow, but made into recent
I better watch that
films. And also Uruguay not often especially well known by outsiders. That's often something that will associate them. But rugby, the origins of South American rugby again is similar to South American football. It was British immigrants, British teachers and sailors and so on who played it, set up clubs, introduced it to pupils, and then obviously, particularly with football, the South American countries made it their own. So that there's bits on the book on the sport, as I say, cricket as well. And in fact, some of the oldest clubs and international fixtures in rugby and cricket outside of the UK were in South America, southern South America, and Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay specifically.
Great fact.
So yeah,
I find the rugby one so interesting though. Do you know? I find it weird how that just sort of connected, because now it's a fairly big sport in Argentina. It's obviously nowhere near football, but I imagine we took rugby to a lot of countries around the world and it just never really stuck. Canada could be a classic example. Barely play it here. US in the early days, you think they might be interested because they play American football, but it's growing, but it's nowhere near as big. But it's just weird how Argentina stuck to that sport and they're now becoming really good, the proper international team now.
Yeah, and it's popular in Uruguay as well.
Yeah.
They're not quite as adept on the world stage as the Pumas in Argentina, but I mean, I think it's the school, it's the origins. It was inculcated in the British schools a bit, really, not unlike in England specifically. Obviously, the private school system helped to and still supports both rugby union and cricket. Obviously, a different story in in Wales and Scotland and Ireland to an extent. But it was in some ways a similar story in South America. It was the clubs. So the clubs that were set up by the Anglo Argentine or Chilean or Uruguayan communities that brought these developed wider interest in these sports, and the school system. So a lot of the oldest clubs in these countries were originally set up often by former pupils who'd learnt under a British teacher or within a British style of education, and then set up their own clubs. Alumni being a classic example in Argentina, the Montevideo Cricket Club, which, as well as playing cricket, also helped to introduce a range of other sports too. Would be another example. So I won't give you the exact example, but I've given you. But there's some really nice. I found really interesting first-hand accounts of some of the earliest sporting football, cricket. Rugby matches in South America in the book, and it's quite interesting to see what's the same, what's changed in those sports, and our perceptions of them, and rivalries ever since.
Yeah, rivalries as well. Yeah, that's interesting, that, isn't it? Even amongst themselves, it's quite interesting as well. But can we circle back to the book, to where people maybe can buy this or pre-order it? And you mentioned the date as well. Any other information you want to share?
So it's out on the 24th of July, and you can get it from all of the good and bad bookshops. If you need a link, if you just go to my website, which is shafikmeghji.com, if you go to any of my social media accounts, which is, I'm normally at Shafik Meghji on them, on Instagram and Threads and Blue Sky and Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days. You can just click on the link, and you can find it there.
I'll put the links in the show notes so people can get it easily from this conversation. So Shafik, welcome back to the show, and also thanks for coming on. I appreciate you making the hat-trick appearance. We didn't touch on football news, but I think it's safe to say my club at Town are down, but your club are going to win the Premier League, so yin and yang here, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to talk too much about English football for those reasons, but I mean, I don't want to tempt fate for Liverpool yet, but it's looking positive, and hopefully, if Ipswich do go down, they'll bounce back up, because I think they've got an excellent manager, and I've really enjoyed watching them this season. And in the first game of the season, they really gave us a run for their money.
Yeah,
and we're certainly unlucky not to be leading at half time in that. And I think I think probably if you go down and come back up, that experience will stand you in good stead to hopefully cement your place in the top flight.
Yeah, I think we've got some good youngsters. A lot of under 21 internationals, so I think we could come back up if we keep them all. So I think we're not too worried. He's not under pressure. He's not going to get sacked, the manager, and he'll stay. If the players stay, I think we're fairly confident we can come back up. But
I mean,
let's see.
Maybe you just need a few South Americans to add some grit and flair to the team to help to provide the boost that you need.
Absolutely. So thanks for coming on. You're always welcome back on the show. And I think the listeners will get a very in-depth conversation about Uruguay, which we touched on, some train rides, and also your book coming out in the summer. So I look forward to reading the book and catching up soon.
Thanks, James. It's always a real pleasure chatting with you. The time just flies by. So I look forward to the fourth appearance at some point in the future.
Yeah, cheers, dude. Appreciate it.
Cool.